Hi, everyone. Welcome to Securing SNAP, the industrial shift to chip away at stolen benefits, hosted by the Food Research and Action Center. I'm Steve Hayward, FRAC's Communications Manager. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few brief housekeeping items. We expect this webinar to run about 60 minutes. We are recording the presentation and will send the recording and slides to everyone who registered in a follow-up email. Feel free to introduce yourself and your organization in the chat. We'll have time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. To ask a question at any time during the webinar, please use the Q&A panel. Closed captioning is available. To turn captions on, click the CC button in the bottom taskbar and select English as the spoken language. With that, I'll pass it off to Salam Bhatti, SNAP Director at FRAC. Take it away, Salam.
Thank you, Stephen. And thank you, everybody, for taking some time out of your Monday to join us today. All right. Welcome. Everybody's coming in. All right. Good afternoon, contiguous America. Just wanted to make sure we were a little after the hour so I could say good afternoon to people from the East Coast to the West Coast. Good morning, Alaska. I hope your coffee is ready, Hawaii. And Romania, why are you here? Oh, okay. Well, why are you doing this? Oh, well, that's not so. No. See, this is not a victimless crime, and that is why we really need to do something to right this ship, which is why we are here today. So welcome to today's webinar titled Securing SNAP, the Industrial Shift to Chip Away at Stolen Benefits. Now, we have a lot to cover today and a wonderful set of panelists ready to go. So let's get down to business to defeat the hunger. I gotta watch out for Disney's lawyers. So here's a quick flow of program. So you know that there is no good time to leave your desk during this webinar. So make sure you have your afternoon snack, your second breakfast, your hydration station, all within reach. And we're going to get started with my favorite part of any ship, the propeller. Justin King from Propel, who will talk about their skimming report. Then we'll get into the weeds with Jamie Topolsky from Conduit, who's going to tell us what is happening BTS. Now, I'm not talking about the K-pop band, that's behind the scenes, with all the industry components of switching from the swipe card to chip. Then we'll jump in with Curtis Miller and Jacob Egler, two Senate staffers, to tell us all the things about a bill that seeks to improve SNAP security. Now, we're going to end with a fiery crescendo, the 11 o'clock number, with Ellen Teller, who will tell us about the state of replacement benefits and what we need to do at this critical juncture. Now, as a heads up, everyone's going to present for about 10 or so minutes. So this should ensure that we have enough time for all the questions. And you should see that Q&A option on your screen where you are free to type out all the questions that you have, and we'll get through them as best as we can during this program. And the chat is enabled, so go off in there, but please make sure you put your questions in the Q&A part. And so let's get it started with Justin King. He is the policy director at Propel. He works to connect Propel's millions of customers with policymakers and other stakeholders to ensure their voice and experience is represented in the policy process and to ensure that their products help their customers make it through every month. Now, he has a long history of helping create policies that help households with low income, both while working within and outside of Congress. So we are so happy that Justin is here to talk to us about his skimming report. Justin, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Salam. Thanks everybody for being here today. And big thanks to Salam for bringing the real jokey energy to like a super serious topic. I'm Justin King. Like Salam said, I work for Propel. Propel builds modern, respectful, effective technology to help Americans with limited income improve their financial health. Our core product is the Propel app, which you may have heard of previously as the provider's app, but we recently rebranded and aligned the app name with the company name. So now everything is Propel. And Propel is a free mobile app that's designed for low-income households to help them manage their complex financial lives and make it through the month every month. One of the core features of the Propel app, some of you may know, is quick and easy access to folks' EBT card balance and transaction history. We know from our research that we've done that making sure that folks are able to access that information really quickly and easily helps them to make their benefits last longer every month. And the average Propel user checks the app 15 to 17 times a month. We serve more than 5 million households every month. 85% of those folks are women. Many receive SSI, SSDI, other benefits. 63% of our user base identifies as single moms, and 87% of our users have one or more kids in the household. So a wide swath of folks using the app to check their EBT balance, stay on top of their household budgeting, and take advantage of the other features that we offer. One of the great things that we get to do, because we serve so many people across the nation, 1 in 4 SNAP households uses the tool that we build, we get to survey them. We survey them quite frequently on a variety of topics. And in April of this year, we surveyed almost 11,000 households about their experiences with account protection, EBT theft, and reimbursement. And that survey reached nearly 2,000 folks who had been actual victims of theft. And I want to share with you a little bit about what they told us. Here are the top takeaways that I'm going to share with you today. The first thing is that consumers, a lot of consumers really have limited understanding of EBT theft, what it is, how it happens, what it means. And I don't think this is a surprise, but I don't think we can sell this short. It needs to be said. EBT theft has terrible impacts on victims. Benefits replacement helps, but too many consumers don't know that it's an option, or they think it's going to be too much hassle for them to pursue. People are trying to protect themselves. They're hearing messages from state government and from others. They're trying to take steps, but the tools that are available to them right now place a huge burden on them as individuals. And frankly, they're insufficient to meeting the task, right? Individualized protections are almost never enough in a situation like this. Consumers really need systemic protection. So those are our core survey takeaways. I'm going to take a little time to dive into the details right now. First thing, like I said before, consumers lack information about EBT theft. We found half of folks had not heard about EBT theft or just had no idea really very much information about it. And that's a problem when the solutions that we're offering up require people to take action to protect themselves. So some folks are very, very aware. About a quarter of people are very, very aware of skimming and phishing and how it all works. A quarter of folks sort of know about it some, but don't have all the details. And then we've got half of folks who really have limited awareness. This is a representative quote from a user named Athena. Athena told us, I just didn't know that criminals can scan our cards or steal from them like that. I thought it was not possible with our EBT cards, like they were protected somehow. And I think the core point from Athena here is, there are only so many things that we can ask people to be experts on. At the end of the day, people just want systems that work for them. And right now, the system that we offer to people to deliver SNAP and TANF benefits and the other benefits that are delivered via EBT is really systemically vulnerable. And that's a real policy problem, and it's a real pain point for people who use the system. One of the other things that I think is really important to notice is that some states have data practices that make it really hard for individual recipients to track their benefits and recognize when bad things are happening to them. In more than 20 states, the state withholds from the individual consumer information about where their money is spent, right? So this is a transaction screen from one of those states. You might recognize this as very similar to your bank account's transaction history, except in your bank account and in about 30 states, instead of seeing food purchased, you would see that $16.98 was spent yesterday at Walmart or Target or the store down the street. The fact that 20-ish states withhold this information from consumers makes it almost impossible for them to know if money was spent down the street or halfway across the country, and it makes it really hard for them to identify that they've been a victim of theft and they need to take action to seek reimbursement. So there are some state practices that really could be updated here to provide better information to consumers. My second point from earlier is that EBT theft intensifies ongoing food and financial insecurity. It is really painful for people and it causes damage. I'll say on a personal note, I've had a number of calls with folks who've been victims of EBT theft, and one of the questions we always try to talk to folks when we talk to them after they're victimized in this way is, how did you make it through the next month? And the pain and frustration and the awful choices that people are presented with are really terrible. From a big picture, from a data perspective, I think the thing that jumps out the most to me in looking at our survey results is a little bit down the list here, but it's still a ton of people. 44% of people who we surveyed said that they borrowed money or went into debt to after they were victimized and their EBT benefits were stolen. And now that's obviously like a thing that people do, but a lot of us know borrowing and debt has lasting consequences. And so we're putting people into an even deeper hole than they're already in by allowing them to be victimized in this way. One of the other really jarring takeaways from our survey is that most theft victims were not reimbursed. And so when we dig into the numbers, we found that about a third of the folks that responded to us said that they had filed a claim and received their reimbursement. Another 10% or so were, had a claim out but hadn't gotten paid back yet. And then we found that more than half of people who responded to us on this question either did not bother to file a claim, did not know that they could file a claim, or their claim was denied. Now, there certainly are many valid reasons in which a claim might be denied. Not all kinds of theft are eligible for reimbursement, and that's something that I think is really important to keep in mind. But this lack of awareness that you can file a claim and a perception that it's just not going to be worth the hassle is a real issue. And here's a couple of quotes from users that illustrate those points. People don't know that this is an option to the extent that they should, and they perceive the process as potentially being too difficult. And like I said earlier, the individual protection measures that we're offering to people right now are really insufficient to the task. We found that 87% of the households that we surveyed are taking steps to try and protect themselves. But you can see that the steps they're taking just aren't really up to the task, right? Never sharing my EBT card or PIN number, that is advice that people have absorbed from human services agencies, from the federal government. This is sort of like SNAP 101. And unfortunately, it's just not a thing that helps protect you in a meaningful way when skimming is the vector for a lot of the theft that we've seen. Covering keypads when entering PIN. Similarly, if the skimming device is sophisticated enough to capture the buttons that you press, it doesn't matter if you protect it. Even more advanced tools that we're seeing come into the market, like card locking, can be very valuable for many people, but it doesn't prevent your information from being captured, and you still have to unlock your card at some point to spend it, which means you're vulnerable when your card is unlocked, and there's a real burden on people to make sure that they're locking and unlocking and relocking their cards very, very quickly. So we see really consistently people are trying to protect themselves. The steps they're taking are not up to the task. So we think it's very clear from the survey work that we've done that additional action is needed to help end EBT theft. It's very clear that Congress should extend and amend the reimbursement policy and not allow that to expire on September 30th, as is scheduled to happen right now. States can do a better job publicizing and simplifying their claims processes. I understand that that's an action that's probably not going to be taken with 2 weeks left in the reimbursement window. But if the reimbursement window is extended, states should really re-examine their processes here and make sure they're doing everything they can to connect people to reimbursement. In the big picture, we really need to close the security gap between EBT and mainstream financial services. We're going to hear a lot about what's in process there and what more needs to be done later in the call. And then the last thing I'd emphasize is when you're working on a tight budget, like low-income households are, you need to know your balance to the penny and to the minute. We need to take steps to ensure that reliable, high-quality data is always available for EBT recipients. I'm going to stop right there. The report that I am pulling from is available on our website, propel.app. And I'm going to turn it back over to Salam, or maybe Jamie's just going to jump in. Let's find out what happens.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Justin, and really appreciate your insights and what Propel did to put all of this together. So this was super helpful. And we just to, I just wanted to piggy onto the Q&A right now while the question is fresh. Do you know which 20 states restrict the information on clients' accounts?
Yeah, that's information that we can provide. All of them are served by, well, that's not entirely true. I can provide that list in the chat, and we'll do so.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Excellent. And yeah, so keep the Q&As coming in. This is starting out great already. Great information from that Propel report. Next, we're going to go into what's going on right now. And Jamie Topolsky is going to talk to us about this. Jamie is the Senior Director of Government Payment Products at Conduent. He's currently serving as the chairperson for the X9 EBT Card Industry Forum, leading an industry-wide effort to update the SNAP messaging standards to support fraud-reducing enhancements. Now, he's been a financial services and fintech veteran of nearly 30 years, and he has more than 15 years of experience working on EMV and other payment technologies in the US and several other countries. He's also led payment innovation efforts at JP Morgan Chase, Discover, and PNC Bank. Now, Jamie, you got an excellent resume here. We're really excited to hear from you on what's going on behind the scenes for this chip card transition.
Great, thanks so much, and really thrilled to be here today talking, giving an update. Yeah, as we know, a big part of the problem is due to the fact that these cards still only have a magnetic stripe. All of the cards that we carry used to only have a magnetic stripe, especially here in the US. And if you may remember, back in 2013, there was a massive data breach. In fact, there was a series of them, but the one that was most widely publicized and people aware was a massive breach at Target. And the reason why there were these data breaches was because it's so easy to steal magnetic stripe data off a card, whether it's actually off the physical card or from the point of sale terminal or any point in between, and then to use that stolen data to make a fake or counterfeit card. It's called counterfeit card fraud, and it was massive and growing. And I'm sure you all remember, those of you who could think back that far, in 2014, 2015, we used to get replacement cards sometimes every month or two from some of our financial institutions, credit unions, banks, because this was such a widespread problem. So that whole industry of credit and debit and prepaid cards largely went to chip several years ago. And now it's time to make a similar change for EBT SNAP benefits. And some people think, well, okay, great, let's get it done. It's just stick a chip in the card and be done with it. But that's not, in fact, the way it works. There's a lot of work to be done, and I'm going to explain to you, let's see if I can share this now, explain to you why it's not a quick and easy process. And by the way, I also will mention a bit about what's called card not present or online fraud and some of the changes we're doing there to try and prevent that. Online purchasing is still a relatively small portion of EBT transactions, maybe 10% of transactions. But what you want to avoid is just migrating fraud from one physical point of sale to online transactions. So you want to head that off if at all possible. So in order to make EBT cards chip capable, you really need to make some changes to the entire infrastructure. It really impacts everything. I call this manic. Traditionally, I call it the manic because the second to right one was like an issuer or issuer processor. In this case, it's a transaction processor. it's a manic process because it does involve everything from merchant to the card. So actually, let's start on the right side because that's really where so much of things have to start. First thing is that the chip, some people think that the chip is just like secure memory. It has the same data that's in the magnetic stripe, but it's just more secure because it's on a chip. That's not correct. That chip is actually a little miniature computer that's in the card. It has a operating system, it has memory, it has a cryptography coprocessor, and it has apps running on it. And every global payment brand has their own slightly different version of it. They all conform to a global standard called EMV, which is a global secure payments specification. But MasterCard is a little bit different than Visa or Discover or American Express. And then if you go abroad, there's JCB and Union Pay. There's there's probably over a dozen out there, and it's hard to make a new one. So it's much easier and quicker to license one. And we're fortunate to be able to license the chip technology for MasterCard for use on EBT cards. It's a robust, very powerful, very secure technology. This doesn't mean that MasterCard is receiving these transactions. There's no visibility into MasterCard for Snap transactions. It just allows us to license collectively to license their chip technology and use it in our cards rather than taking 5 years to build a new one. So we have the license. We have to develop what's called a personalization profile, which is how you configure the software on that chip so it works properly for an EBT transaction. So just one example. When you use a debit card to pay, sometimes you are entering a PIN, rarely, but sometimes you're asked to sign, and often you don't have to do any of those. You can just either tap or insert the chip and go with nothing whatsoever in terms of verification. Well, with an EBT transaction, based on current regulations, you have to submit a PIN every single time. And so the way you do that is you configure the chip in the card to require that the person has to enter their PIN every time they either tap or insert the chip. So that's called a personalization profile. And there's other rules that are enforced through the programming of the chip as well. So that's personalized onto the chip when the card is set up for the individual recipient. So at the same time that you're printing the person's name and the account number on the front and encoding the mag stripe, there's still a mag stripe that's on the card as well that gets encoded, and then you're encoding the chip. That's that step. Obviously, the manufacturing of the card needs to be changed. There's cryptography keys that need to go into the card. All of this stuff needs to be set up just to make the plastic. Then there's the processing of the transactions. The two main processors in handling EBT Snap transactions are Conduit and FIS. And so we both have to update all of our systems to be able to handle the extra data that comes with an EMV chip transaction. It's not just the same little bit of data that comes with a mag stripe or swiped transaction. There's a lot of additional information, and what it gets us is information that we can use to determine with certainty that the card is genuine and the transaction is genuine. So even if a criminal is able to still skim data off the card, and it's possible to skim the data off the card, the thing is that they can't use that data for anything meaningful. You can't make a fake chip card with stolen chip transaction data, because there's extra secret keys that are needed to do so. That's the huge benefit. So the card is genuine and the transaction is genuine. But there's a lot of upgrades that need to go in to be able to handle that extra data. Physical hardware needs to be changed. Processing needs to be changed. It's some significant heavy lifting that needs to happen. And in the middle, you have what's called the network. And for most of us, we're used to a network like MasterCard or Visa, or a debit network like Excel or Shazam or Nice or Plus that routes all of our transactions. Well, with EBT, it's a bit different. There's several different companies that are often referred to as third-party processors, and they route the transactions. So there's no central clearinghouse or central control point that covers all these transactions. So we need to make sure that all of the third-party processors are ready and able to be able, again, to handle this extra EMV chip data in both directions. When it comes from the merchant, going to basically to the state or the state's processor to authorize a transaction. And then the return, if the state, assuming the state approves the transaction or declines it, the return message also has EMV data in it. So again, they have work to do to handle all the extra data through their pipes. The acquirer is usually the one that deals directly with the merchant. And they often are dealing with every payment brand. So they're processing or acquiring SNAP transactions, Visa, MasterCard, debit, Amex, whatever. They have to be able to handle the extra data. And then the merchants, they need to be able to update their point of sale terminal and the software that runs on that terminal to be able to handle this new EBT SNAP chip card transaction and specification. There's something called an application ID that's on the chip that lets the terminal know what type of a chip card it is. If you think about when you get an email with an attachment, if the attachment ends in PPT, excuse me, you know it's a PowerPoint transaction and PowerPoint's gonna open and run it. And if it ends in DOC, okay, it's a Word document, Word's gonna open. The equivalent thing in the chip card world is the application ID. So one ID means, oh, it's a MasterCard debit card. And another means, oh, it's a Discover credit card. And there's a brand new one that means, oh, it's an EBT SNAP card. So they need to get that loaded into the POS terminal and configure the terminal to know how to handle that card effectively and to pass the necessary data back to their acquirer for any sort of a chip transaction. Excuse me.
And
So,
Jamie,
yeah.
Do you know how long the processing takes?
Oh, for just a transaction round trip?
Yeah, I think that's.
Or for the actually to do all this work?
Both.
So the transaction itself is still very, very quick. You know, what's like the putting the card into the terminal takes a bit longer. Even tapping the card, it's quick, but it's again, there's a lot more data that's flowing back and forth between the terminal and the card. And then the flowing of the transaction back and forth, there's standards that's usually within a couple of seconds, you know, before the transaction times out. The challenge is the work that it needs for all these players to get this stuff done. It really takes, like, if you think about it, it took us a long time to get credit and debit cards switched over. Remember how long you were still swiping your card at gas stations because they had to change their pumps, and it took years for them to do so. This should not be quite so bad, but it still is a lot of work for them to do. So it's not going to be this year. It's going to take into next year for these cards to start getting out there. Excuse me. But the work has started and the specifications are complete. Let me talk a bit about how we got that done, because there's an organization called X9, which is a standards body for electronic and financial transactions here in the US market. It's actually accredited by ANSI, which is the American National Standards Institute. And X9 has 5 subcommittees that administer 130 different standards. It's specifically the X9A11 group that handles electronic benefit transactions or EBT transactions. They're the ones really that update the message specification to be able to handle this extra data. But the group that's done the lion's share of the lifting is the work group. It's an EBT work group. And believe it or not, there's currently 573 members on that work group that represent 251 different companies and organizations and states and agencies. It's incredibly active and well attended. We have weekly meetings. Sometimes we'll miss a week or two, but in general, weekly meetings where we'll discuss specifications. We're working on white papers for how to implement. There's every week, without fail, there's over 100 people dialed into these things. It's free for anyone to join, and we'll get information afterwards to anyone who wants to join and just to listen in. It's very interesting just to hear what's going on in the progress. But that's the group that's really doing a lot of the lion's share of the lifting to figure out how to make all this work and to give guidance to the merchants and the states that need to issue these cards and the processors and everyone in the middle for how to implement and test. Now, there's a couple of states that have stepped up to be the first that want to issue cards. The state of California, they wanted to issue cards this year before the end of the summer, But what they found is that the merchants and the processors really aren't ready yet. In fact, when they're testing with some preliminary chip cards, what they're finding is that not only does the chip not work, but in some cases, because there's a chip on the card, the mag stripe doesn't work either, because the terminal keeps wanting you to use the chip, but the terminal doesn't yet know how to use that chip. So it's caught in this kind of loop that you can't get out of. You swipe the card, it says, please insert the chip, and then you insert the chip, it says, I don't know this chip, please swipe the card, and it goes around and around. So we're working to get that fixed. And right now it looks like they're going to launch in January of next year. And the state of Oklahoma is also working aggressively to launch their program. And they'll probably get started in sometime in Q2 of next year in terms of actually issuing cards. So, and there are other states lined up ready to go as well. So I think that's about as much time as I have, and I want to make sure we leave some time for questions. I'm looking over my notes. Oh, I know one other thing I did want to mention very briefly. I alluded to it before. Online fraud. Believe it or not, not only do these EBT cards not have a chip in them, they don't have a 3-digit security code on the back of the card like you do on every other card in your wallet. So what that means is if someone skims the magnetic stripe or steals the data from a transaction, they can use it to shop online because they don't need a 3-digit security code that's present on the back of the plastic. So as part of this project, we figured let's get them both done at the same time. As we roll out the chip on the card, we're also adding the security code to the back of the card. And we also updated the message specification to say, okay, for online shopping, ask for that 3-digit security code. So that even if a criminal has skimmed, and by the way, they can skim not just the magnetic stripe, but they can do an overlay on the pin pad and essentially skim the pin as well. So they can have the PIN, they can have the data, but without that 3-digit code, they won't be able to complete a transaction online. So let me pause there and pass it back for our next speaker and leave some time for some questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Jamie. And I have so many questions, but I really want to get into Curtis and Jacob. Curtis is the legislative assistant for U.S. Senator John Fetterman, supporting the senator's work on the Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry Committee. He and Senator Fetterman have made protecting, strengthening, and modernizing SNAP a priority in the upcoming Farm Bill. And they've introduced legislation to expand benefits and eligibility and improve cybersecurity. And Curtis is joined with Jacob Egler. He is the Natural Resources and Judiciary Counsel for U.S. Senator Ron Wyden, and he assists on the senator's nutrition and agricultural priorities. Now, Senator Wyden has a long history of working to combat hunger, and Jacob is currently working on the senator's effort to modernize EBT benefits to prevent the theft of essential food benefits in order to protect the recipients of this vital assistance. So let's get into it with Jacob and Curtis, who will talk about the legislation that's on the table right now.
Thank you so much. It's really good to be here today and appreciate the invitation to participate. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the legislation that my boss has worked on with Senator Fetterman, as well as Senator Cassidy. And so that piece of legislation, S 3893, is a piece of legislation that's intended to address the issues that we've been talking about today, protecting the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program benefits from theft. And it's entitled the Enhanced Cybersecurity for SNAP Act of 2024. It's bipartisan, bicameral legislation. The House companion to the Senate bill is HR 7585, sponsored by Reps Kim and Lawler. So at its core, what the bill does is the bill requires the U.S. Department of Agriculture to review and update cybersecurity and digital service regulations for SNAP, EBT cards, and mobile payments within 2 years of the bill's passage. And then again, at least once every 5 years thereafter. The bill requires the updates will ensure that cybersecurity measures for EBT cards and mobile payments keep pace with payment security safeguards that are used by the private sector and by federal agencies, including chip cards. So specific requirements that are detailed by the legislation for the regulations that USDA must issue that enable better cybersecurity and digital access to SNAP benefits include providing a choice of multiple, accessible, reliable, and mobile-friendly interfaces for households to manage their EBT accounts, timely notification through these interfaces for transactions, allowing for households to report fraud and freezing or unfreezing accounts through those interfaces. To facilitate this work, the legislation requires that states begin issuing fraud-resistant chip-enabled cards within 2 years of the development of new regulations, and then gradually phase out insecure magnetic stripes from EBT cards over a 5-year period. So for the first 4 years after the new regulations, the cards would be required to include the chip, and then for those 4 years, you wouldn't include the mag stripe, and then in that 5th year, the mag stripe, if you've got existing cards in EBT cards in circulation that have a mag stripe, then those cards would be required to be reissued. So to support this, the federal government would reimburse states for reasonable costs of complying with the bill. Some of those costs would include, or expected to include, upfront costs for paid to card vendors, additional annual fees for chip-enabled cards, and the postal costs that are associated with delivering the updated cards. There is a grant program that would be established for eligible merchants in order to help those merchants pay for the costs of updating their payment processing systems, as we discussed, including support for farmers markets, farmers that sell direct to consumers, and merchants that are authorized to participate in SNAP that don't currently have the terminals or located in food deserts. So there's a number of other important provisions that are included in the bill as well that I'll just mention briefly. And I think I saw a comment or question come through earlier in the webinar about the time that it can take to get replacement cards. Oftentimes households can go for over a week without the ability to use benefits while they await replacement cards. So the legislation requires that the regulations that are established ensure that households can get replacement cards and access benefits within 3 business days of making a request. Households can't be charged for the replacement cards in the event of card malfunction, fraud, if the card expires or is required to be replaced. Retailers that are applying to participate in the program would be required to have chip compatible payment terminals in each one of their store locations. And then finally, the USDA would be required to publish a report on the security of Puerto Rico's NAP, Nutrition Assistance Program, EBT card systems, and their resistance to cloning. So that's sort of a brief overview of what the legislation that we're working to advance is designed to require, and happy to keep the dialogue going. If folks want to reach out to have additional questions about the bill's requirements or to provide feedback to Senator Wyden on additional ideas that folks have for this work. Currently working to try and advance this legislation through the next farm bill or any other opportunity that presents itself. And I guess with that, would like to go ahead and turn it over to Curtis with Senator Fetterman to talk a little bit more about the broader context of opportunities to secure nutrition assistance benefits from theft by criminals. So thank you.
Thanks, Jacob. Thanks for the invite to FRAC, and I'm super excited to be here with so many passionate and advocates, and really appreciate all the work you're doing. I want to start off talking a bit about the development of the bill that Jacob just went over, and then I'll talk some more about the legislative history outside of this bill. But I know that some of the folks that Senator Wyden's team and I worked with on the bill as introduced are on this call, and that's super exciting. I wanted to talk about one specific provision that we solicited feedback on and had extensive conversations on, just as an example of the input that we received from this to ideally strengthen both the impact and the viability of the bill. So as originally written, the bill would have prohibited the EBT cards under these new regulations with chips from being used outside of states that the EBT card was issued in or that borders that state. So understanding the need for this community input, we were working with some national stakeholders as well as stakeholders such as food banks in Oregon and Pennsylvania and other states. And we heard loud and clear from stakeholders about the need to have kind of switch this requirement. Essentially that SNAP recipients may not know about this. How are we ensuring that this information is being publicized to EBT users and that they may not know about this, may travel to another state and not be able to use their card and not even know why. So in the bill as introduced, we changed that requirement so that it was an opt-in to have that extra security feature. As the bill is written, EBT cards are issued and are automatically able to be used regardless of location, but their states are required to have an opt-in feature where recipients can make it so that they can only use the card in the state it was issued in or those surrounding states. And that was something that we heard from. I know I saw Just Harvest is on this call and a couple other organizations. So I really appreciate the input we received on that. Another thing that we are working on and aware of is the USDA publishing some proposed rulemaking in the coming months in the fall as a result of the 2023 Appropriations Omnibus, which directs USDA to issue these regulations to enhance cybersecurity for EBT users, to address skimming, to address card cloning, and some other issues. So while the Wyden office and my boss and Senator Cassidy are working to ideally pass the Enhanced Cybersecurity for SNAP Act, which I think from our perspective gives USDA more clear direction and more long-lasting authority to keep up with these technologies as they continue to develop and evolve, to issue further regulations in the future as necessary, as determined by USDA, by industry stakeholders, by Congress. We're really excited to see this regulation put out. I know Jamie was talking about the working group, and I think there's some working together on these two issues as far as the standards go with how the proposed rule might impact EBT users. So as we work to pass a farm bill, ideally this year, and hopefully to see the Enhanced Cybersecurity for SNAP Act included in that farm bill, we also know that nothing is guaranteed when it's Congress doing the work. And so we're looking towards how we can also influence that proposed rule to make sure that we are considering all avenues to protect EBT users from these the skimming and this card cloning and other issues. So I will pass it back to Salam, but also look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you, Curtis, and thank you, Jacob. So a great assessment of what we're looking to do moving ahead. Now, let's talk about what we can do to activate our advocacy parts of the FRAC network. So we're going to talk with Ellen Teller, the Chief Government Affairs Officer at FRAC. Now, Ellen directs the development and implementation of FRAC's legislative agenda. She works with Congress, national organizations, and FRAC's diverse state and local grassroots field network. Ellen advocates for improved access and participation to domestic anti-hunger programs for individuals with low incomes. Now, bring us home, Ellen Teller, for my favorite segment, ET Phone Home.
Thanks. And thanks everyone for like an incredibly informative presentation. I've been taking notes and I've been learning a lot. And I didn't realize that about the CVV codes. So thank you. So as Salam said, we've been talking long-term solutions, but there's also a short-term looming crisis ahead of us. And I wanted to talk about that. So in the Consolidated Appropriations Act in December of 2022, Congress tried to deal with the replacement of fraudulently taken SNAP benefits. And that replacement of benefits runs through this fiscal year. So it ends on September 30th of this month. And so while we're dealing with the overall card security, we have to make sure that while we're dealing with that issue, victims of SNAP skimming continue to receive replacement benefits. And there are some in Congress that are a little bit hesitant to renew this replacement of benefits because they want to first hear about what is happening with the card security portion of it. And we keep saying you could do both at the same time. You could work on the long-term solutions while ensuring that victims of card theft are not held at a loss. And so there are a few things folks on this call can do. And I want to do the short term first, and then we can talk about actions on the long term. So I call them the deciding dozen. I've worked with Salam too long. There are four corners, as we say, for different segments of congressional action. So there's leadership, which the four corners are obviously Schumer and McConnell over in the Senate and Johnson and Jeffries in the House. Then there's the authorizing committee, and that is the Senate and House Agriculture Committee, and that's Stabenow and Bozeman in the Senate. Mr. Fetterman is our subcommittee chair. And then there's David Scott from Georgia and G.T. Thompson from Western PA. They're the authorizers. They're the ones that will be working on the long-term solutions to card security. Then there are the appropriators. They're the people that deal with the annual adjustments needed to keep government programs running. And the appropriators in the Senate are Collins from Maine and Murray from Washington and Cole from Oklahoma, who's relatively new in that position, and Rosa DeLauro from Connecticut. These 12 people are going to be somewhat in a room or multiple rooms, and they'll be hammering out the CR. The appropriators don't want to authorize on an appropriations bill. That's why they go back to the House and Senate Ag Committee leadership, because they want to make sure whatever they do, it is okay with the authorizing committee, which is working on the Farm Bill and the long-term solutions. And of course, leadership is going to do the whole overarching parameters of whatever is in the CR. Now, last week, a long-term CR was rejected by the House Republicans. It didn't even make it to the floor. So now they're back at the drawing board and trying to figure out what they're going to do. And there are other extraneous issues, but the duration of time of the CR is at play. And so we think there'll be a CR to get government programs through the election, excuse me, and into maybe early mid-December. We know Congress usually hammers these things out up until the last minute. So staff don't make plans for the holidays because they just don't know how long they're going to stay in town till some kind of a longer term omnibus bill gets hammered out. For us, whether it's a short term and then another short term and then an omni, we need to make sure that replacement benefits are on each of these. Ideally, we would love to see what happened in December of 22, and that is replacement benefits outlasted the life of the omnibus spending package. That doesn't happen often. So we just want to make sure we are protected at any phase of the legislative activity. So one thing we want folks to do is if you are in a state that is affected by skimming, make sure your members of Congress know exactly what is happening to clients back home. That's really important. And FNS, and Salam, you could put the link to FNS's website in the chat. It has reports of all the different states who are reporting in, and I believe like 49 states have reported in what is happening in their states on skimming. New reports will be coming in shortly. I think the current reports go back to January. So make sure you know what's happening in your state, whether skimming is happening, and communicating with your elected officials that this is a problem and explaining how it's harming families. Number two, we need more co-sponsors for both the House and Senate Enhanced Cybersecurity Act. That's the long-term fix. And we need to make sure that there is a long-term fix and that people are protected much the same way that credit card holders are protected. So we definitely need co-sponsors. We need elected officials to know what's going on in their backyards. And we need to make sure that deciding dozen understand that while we're working on a more permanent fix, they have a responsibility to continue to provide replacement benefits to protect beneficiaries while that more permanent fix is underway.
All right. Thank you so much, Ellen. So be on the lookout. Once we do package up the recording, we will be sending out your next steps that we would love for you to do to get the ball rolling in this space. So we do have 5 minutes left. We have a few questions. And one of the questions Jamie did answer by typing it out, but just for the benefit of everybody, I wanted to ask you, Jamie, so that people can hear it and it gets captured in the recording. Sure. The stores that currently accept chip cards and also EBT payments, are they going to need to buy new point of sale systems once this is all done?
No, in all likelihood, no. If a point of sale terminal supports, let's say Visa, MasterCard, chip cards already, and this merchant's been doing that same point of sale hardware should be fine to this. Again, these are standard EMV cards. We're licensing an existing technology to help that. However, there still is programming to be done. Like I said, that there's a new application ID for these cards that needs to make its way into the point of sale terminal so it can recognize it. There's a terminal configuration parameters called TACs, terminal action codes. Those need to get fascinating if you all want to see those bits and bytes. But a lot, so this is a case where sometimes the smaller retailers have a bit easier because they just have a standalone point of sale terminal, on their counter. Some of the mid-size and bigger retailers, they're the ones where you'll sometimes be prompted, would you like to donate $1 to the charity of the month? Do you have enter your loyalty number? Now payment is integrated into a pretty complex point of sale infrastructure. And that's where you need to get third parties involved to help with that programming. So the amount of work varies from retailer to retailer. But the good news is, yeah, if you have a point of sale terminal or hardware that supports other chip transactions, there's absolutely no reason why it shouldn't support these as well.
So if my understanding is correct, the standards were completed at the end of last month?
Yes, I didn't include a link. I posted a link into the chat. Hopefully everyone got it, where you can download it, or I put it somewhere, maybe in the answers. One of the answers where you can get the updated spec from ANSI. Although I would also encourage anyone who's a retailer or a state to talk to their processor, because often there's like an intermediary. It's basically like say the merchant acquirer, they will take that ANSI spec and they'll tweak it to fit within their spec. So there's a slightly different technical specification for how the point of sale terminal connects up to the host interface. So, but again, the ANSI spec is all of $70. And what's nice is it really does show exactly what's changed for point of sale transactions and for online transactions. And how we're going to handle there was a question about how we're going to handle this transition period for the online transactions, because obviously not every retailer is going to update their website on day one to ask a SNAP payment recipient to enter that 3-digit code, and we're asking for the expiration date. And not every card out there is going to have them from day one. So we've thought through, okay, how do you handle that transition period gracefully? And those instructions are in there as well.
Now, the big question, of course, is always timeline. So the standards came out a few weeks ago. Does that mean California and Oklahoma are, they're ready to go? They could go live immediately, and every other state can wait to see what happens?
That would be wonderful. Unfortunately, no, because of all of those intermediaries that have the work to do. The big challenge what we're having right now, it's called a fallback problem. If obviously everyone wants to use that chip, but if for some reason the chip isn't supported, or if it's not functioning, the card and the terminal are supposed to fall back to using the magnetic stripe. And there's different types of fallback. There's fallback when the chip is failing, or there's a technical problem. There's fallback when the point of sale terminal doesn't yet recognize the chip that's in that card, which is what we have right now. Both of those are causing real world problems with our preliminary tests. And until we have a certain comfort level that those have been largely eliminated, which is going to take several months, no one feels comfortable putting those cards out there. The last thing you want to do is spend a lot of money as a state, mail out all these new cards, and have the recipient not be able to shop anywhere because the chip is failing and now the magstripe doesn't work either. So that's the #1 priority. That's why I said California, I think, is going to be early next year, with Oklahoma being a fast follower.
All right, thank you. And Jacob Curtis, with California and Oklahoma looking to get this thing out soon, should the Fetterman-Wyden bill go through, would it slow them down or prevent them from going forward?
So, as I mentioned with the bill, the bill, requires the issuance of regulations, and then requires steps following the implementation of regulations. And so there is a phase-in period for a lot of this work for the states. So the bill doesn't prevent states from moving forward proactively, but this would provide a cohesive set of federal regulations for implementation of the program. And a lot of this can be worked out through the development of those regulations and the public comment periods and participation periods that folks have in doing that. We're just trying to make sure, that again, as I mentioned when I went over the bill, that the standards that sort of the minimum standards that we're setting at the federal level are ones that meet the levels that we're seeing in the private sector and the rest of the federal government employing.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. There are some questions that are outstanding in the Q&A. If different panelists can tackle that. We are at the top of the hour, and being respectful of everybody's time, both panelists and audience, thank you so much for participating in today's panel. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us here at FRAC, and we'll be able to get you in touch with our wonderful panelists. Again, thanks so much. And it's been a heck of a week, and it's only Monday. So enjoy the rest of your next a few days. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.